Oregon, home to the Portland Trail Blazers, one of the teams in the NBA, is a state of remarkable natural beauty, largely defined by its immense forests. Over 30.5 million acres of lush woodland cover nearly half of the state, offering a unique landscape that captivates nature lovers. Nestled in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, Oregon is celebrated for its diverse and breathtaking scenery, from rugged coastlines to towering mountains. But beyond the picturesque beauty lies a more complex story, one that touches on the darker side of Oregon's history and the social challenges it continues to face. Let's dive deeper to explore both sides of this remarkable state. One of the most pressing issues in Oregon is its homelessness crisis, which has escalated dramatically in recent years. By 2023, the state, and particularly its largest city, Portland, was grappling with one of the highest rates of homelessness in the United States. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development reported alarming statistics, especially concerning homeless families and teenagers. In Portland alone, about 74% of homeless families were living unsheltered, making it the city with the highest percentage of homeless families living on the streets in the nation. On a broader scale, nearly 70% of homeless teens across Oregon were without access to any form of shelter. Even more troubling, that number rose by a staggering 1/3 compared to the previous year, reflecting the deepening severity of the crisis. Statewide, around 13,000 of Oregon's 20,000 homeless population were living without shelter as of early 2023, roughly 65% of those affected. This growing crisis has also seen a sharp rise in homeless families, with a 16% increase in 2023 compared to the previous year. As if these numbers weren't dire enough, Oregon has faced additional challenges from extreme weather events, such as wildfires and flooding, which have displaced even more people, compounding the homelessness problem. Efforts have been made to address the crisis. There have been expansions in shelter capacities and transitional programs, but the root of the issue, affordable housing, remains a major barrier. The scarcity of affordable homes has left thousands without stable living conditions. And while the state has made strides to improve the situation, the demand far outweighs the solutions currently in place. For organizations on the front lines, like the Blanchet House in Portland, the strain is evident. They reported a 27% increase in demand for meals over the past year, underscoring the growing desperation among those affected by homelessness. In response, they are planning to open new dormitories to provide shelter for more people. Despite these efforts, the homelessness crisis in Oregon remains a serious challenge. The combination of insufficient housing and the relentless impact of natural disasters has left many vulnerable people in peril. Portland, the largest city in Oregon, is widely known for its liberal and progressive values. Its reputation as a forward-thinking hub, however, does not shield it from a darker, more complex past and present, particularly when it comes to extremism. Despite its modern-day image, Portland has a history of racial tension and white supremacist activity, which continues to leave a mark on the city. In the 1990s, Portland saw a surge in violent extremism, particularly from a faction of racist skinheads and other white supremacist groups. This wave of hate culminated in several tragic incidents, the most notorious being the murder of Mulugeta Serao, an Ethiopian college student. Serao was brutally killed by 3 members of a skinhead gang in a racially motivated attack in the suburbs of Portland. This violent act was emblematic of the larger issue of growing white supremacist movements in the region. To understand the roots of extremism in Oregon, one must look back at the state's history. In 1844, Oregon passed exclusionary laws designed to keep Black people out of the region. These laws, which included public whipping, fines, and even forced deportation, were a grim reflection of the racial attitudes at the time. From 1857 to 1927, Oregon's state constitution explicitly barred Black individuals from entering or living in the state. This legacy of exclusion laid a foundation for the rise of extremist groups who would go on to exploit racial and social tensions in the decades that followed. Although the 1990s saw a rise in anti-racist activism, with individuals and groups pushing back against white supremacist forces, often in direct street confrontations, the city of Portland continues to struggle with extremist groups that seek to exploit its social instability. Even today, Portland remains a focal point for far-right and white supremacist activity, posing ongoing challenges to the city's ideals of inclusivity and progress. Another pressing issue casting a shadow over Oregon, and particularly Portland, is the state's growing drug crisis. Portland has become one of the hardest-hit cities in the nation, especially in areas like Skidmore Fountain, where drug use, particularly of fentanyl, has reached epidemic levels. The problem intensified after the passing of Measure 110, a law that decriminalized the possession of small amounts of narcotics. Measure 110, which was designed with the intention of shifting drug policy from punitive to rehabilitative, no longer treats small-scale drug possession as a criminal offense. Instead, offenders face minor civil penalties, such as fines, that can be dismissed if the individual contacts a substance abuse hotline. However, this well-meaning law has had unintended consequences. Shockingly, only 1% of those who receive citations actually follow through and reach out to the hotline, reflecting a major disconnect between policy goals and on-the-ground realities. The data paints a grim picture of the aftermath. Oregon has seen a dramatic spike in drug overdoses since Measure 110 took effect. In 2019 and 2020, overdose deaths ranged from 280 to 472 cases statewide. However, after the decriminalization policy was enacted in 2021, overdose deaths surged to 738 cases. By 2022, that number had nearly reached 1,000, revealing the depth of the crisis. In response to the growing concerns over Measure 110's impact, Oregon's legislature has moved to reassess the state's approach to drug addiction and overdoses, particularly with regard to fentanyl. New proposals aim to reinstate some criminal penalties for drug possession, specifically for the purpose of encouraging individuals to seek treatment rather than face incarceration. Oregon is currently ranked 32nd out of 50 U.S. states in terms of mental health care, a standing that highlights the significant challenges faced by the state in this area. The situation is particularly concerning when considering the severe staff shortages across mental health clinics. Roughly 25% of positions in these clinics remain unfilled, with 6 counties in Oregon having no psychologists at all last year. This shortage has made it increasingly difficult for many people, especially marginalized groups such as people of color, children, and those living in rural areas, to access necessary mental health care. The workforce shortage isn't a new problem, but the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated it significantly. Many mental health professionals have experienced burnout and high stress levels, while wages in the field continue to lag behind those in physical health care. In Lake County, for example, a rural area in Oregon, there is only one psychiatric nurse managing medication for approximately 400 clients. This overwhelming workload underscores the immense pressure on mental health providers in Oregon, and the limited access to care only deepens the complexity of the issue. Cultural barriers in mental health care also hinder treatment for certain groups. For instance, in Portland, An indigenous Latino teenager had to leave an eating disorder clinic after feeling misunderstood by a predominantly white female counseling staff who failed to adequately address his cultural needs and identity. This example highlights how cultural competency is still a critical gap in Oregon's mental health services. While Oregon ranks 25th in violent crime among U.S. states, with an average of 342 cases per 100,000 residents, about 10% lower than the national average, the state faces a more pressing issue with property crime. Oregon has the fourth highest rate of property crime in the nation, particularly when it comes to theft, which remains alarmingly high. 3 cities in Oregon are notable for their exceptionally high property crime rates: Portland, Ontario, and Rogue River. In Ontario, property crime occurs at a rate of approximately 6,006 cases per 100,000 residents. In Portland, that figure is even higher, with 6,324 cases per 100,000 residents. Rogue River, however, tops the list, with 6,593 cases per 100,000 residents. As a result, Oregon consistently ranks among the top 5 states with the highest property crime rates in the U.S. Property crimes in Oregon vary widely, ranging from burglaries, where perpetrators illegally enter buildings, to general theft and vehicle theft. According to FBI data, there are 361 burglary cases per 100,000 residents in the state. General theft, which includes everything from shoplifting to more substantial robberies, stands at a staggering 2,000 cases per 100,000 residents. Vehicle theft is also significant, with 552 cases per 100,000 residents. These statistics reveal the multifaceted nature of crime in Oregon, with violent crime relatively low, but property crime persistently high, impacting communities across the state. The state's efforts to address these issues, particularly property crime, will be critical in determining how it evolves in the coming years.